So welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Very excited to have Amy and Laura with us again for today's workshop, overview of safety in the classroom. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to them. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Charles. I am excited to be back with you again and have a two-part series this time. So we'll meet this week. And if you can join us again next week, we'll be continuing the conversation on thinking about safe and stress-free classrooms. So today is thinking about the overview of safety in the classroom and what that means to us and the many, many ways that manifests. I'm coming today with a really open palette for discussion. So I hope that you will bring your ideas and your experiences as well. And we'll have a lot of opportunities to contribute. So I do want to start with introductions as we have in other presentations. It's just nice to know who's in the room with us today. So if you would please take a moment to put in the chat so you can see who you're with in our discussions. Put your name, your organization, and the population that you teach so we have a chance to connect there. So while those chats are coming in, feel free to take a moment to read those and see who else is here, and we'll take a moment to introduce ourselves as well. So I'm Amy. I have about 10 years in the adult ed sphere now with ESL and GED and ABE and community programs and writing composition and the gamut of things. And so I'm excited to be sharing with so many other different educators here. And Laura, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
It's great to be here with Amy. I'm Laura. I've been teaching since 2010 with a background in adult literacy, teaching at community colleges, and I now teach at State University in New Jersey. Since 2017, I teach grad students and undergraduate students there, and previously had a background in community arts, so did some adult education there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. All right, so I'm seeing so many introductions in the chat. Thanks for sharing that information there. And I'm excited to see what all wisdom everybody is bringing today with your experiences. So just to give you a rundown of what we are planning for today, our agenda is, as we have in the past, you came to any of our past workshops so far, we like to start with a grounding activity. I know we're all coming from many different spaces and different experiences and the weekend and the morning and all the things. So we'll start by grounding together. We'll have an opening topic brainstorm, so a lot of chance for you to participate in the chat. And then we're going to be talking about a few topics. We'll talk about stress in the brain and get into a little bit of the science side of that. And then we'll talk about more of the practical side. So what it means for a classroom to be a protective factor in someone's life. What are really practical safety strategies we can use in the classroom? And then ending by thinking about what's our circle of concern, our circle of influence, where can we really implement these things? And we will have a time at the end, if you're able to stay with us, to do some breakout groups and sharing. So you'll have a chance to talk with other people, share your questions, concerns, and ideas as well. So I'll pass back to Laura for a grounding moment.
Great. So before we ground, it can be helpful to just take a minute and check in, like, honestly, without any judgment, to see, like, where are we, and stress-wise, what are we bringing in today? So if you would just take a minute and just check in with yourself. If you had to give your current stress level, how you feel right now, a number between 1 and 10, and 1 is like, you're so relaxed, you're on the beach. And 10 is like a total catastrophe. What would that number be for you? Just noticing without any judgment. And then without really inviting or needing anything to change in particular, I'm just going to lead us in this really simple grounding activity. And as Amy's pointed out before, this is something that you could create the time to do with your learners at any point if you find it helpful, if you haven't already tried it. And so this one is a grounding moment. On the screen here, there's a square. and each side of the square has a different invitation. So we start by like inhaling, and then we're going to hold, exhale, and then we're going to rest. And you could think of this like the square is taking place like in your body, or you could think of this like you're just going to draw a square in the air in front of you. You could even do it with your hand or your eyes, whatever feels most accessible to you. So we're going to do this 3 rounds together and then 3 rounds on your own. So inhale, hold, exhale, rest. Inhale, hold, exhale, rest. Inhale, hold, exhale, rest. Go ahead and do a few rounds, 3 rounds on your own. And without rushing anyone, if you're still breathing, that's just fine. I'm just going to invite you to check in again with that number to see, again, without any judgment, what number would you give your stress level now?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura, for leading us to that moment and giving us a chance to ground together. Thank you to everybody who shared some of that in the chat as well. So this is such a great thing. I know I used to carry a clipboard in certain teaching environments, and I would keep different notes to myself on that clipboard. And this is one of the things that I always think of could be a great, easy thing to keep as a reminder of a grounding moment there. So without further ado, we're going to have a chance for you all to jump into the chat. So if you can get your fingers ready to type a little bit, there will be a few opportunities to contribute some ideas here. The first one is just something for fun. And I want you to think outside of classroom kind of environments right now and just think about a safe place for you. So I have 3 images here. There's an image of a tree, an image of a coffee shop, and then an image of a comfy yellow couch. So perhaps one of those resonates with you, perhaps it's something else, but I'd love for you to take a moment and drop in the chat someplace that just feels safe for you. Is it at home? Is it a sunny day in a park? Is it your favorite little corner booth spot in that coffee shop near your house? Where is it for you? So while you're thinking about that and dropping some ideas in there, I have a favorite spot actually just in my home, and it's in one particular little cozy corner, and it's like amped up to the next level. If I can have a blanket around my shoulders too, it's just like that tells me it's okay to settle in. So those cues are super important for us. So I see some coming in. Laura, would you mind sharing those as you see them?
Sure. I love it. Coffee, 1, coffee, 2, cafe. Coffee cafe is 1, 2 is tree, sunny outside setting. And then someone wrote home, any day, any weather in nature, anywhere my dog is.
Oh, pets are so important in that.
My bathroom, in my bathtub with a cup of coffee, absolutely. Couch or the beach. For
Awesome.
me, it's the woods near my house with my family.
Oh, those are beautiful.
And riding my bike on gravel trails.
Awesome. So keep thinking about that. If you have additional ones, feel free to throw them in the chat. I want us to start with our own safe places because they tell us something about what safety means to us. and what it means to feel kind of at home in a space, and like it's a place where you can open up and where you can take in new information as well. So with that in mind, I want us to think about both physical and digital classrooms and what that might mean for us. So we're going to start with physical classrooms. We'll get to digital in just a minute. But thinking about it, when you walk into a physical classroom space, whether as a learner or an educator, what makes a space feel safe to you? Is it something that you bring with you? Is it something about the space itself that you notice? Is it a particular setup? Is it knowing where the exits are? Is it having windows or not having windows? There are a lot of different components, and it could be different for different people. So the image on the screen here is just a traditional kind of, 2 desks in front of a blackboard type physical space, but it can take on a lot of meanings. I know for me, I like to walk into a space that's not really overcrowded. When there are so many desks in tight rows and it feels hard to get out, that can be really uncomfortable and feel unsafe to me. Laura, what are other people thinking about that?
Well, while we're waiting for ideas to come in, I was just thinking about, for me, there's both this freedom, like the ability to move and sit, where I want to, or clear places in the room to take breaks, and then also connection, like either knowing someone in the room already, or opportunities that are clearly kind of laid out to, I don't know, stop and talk to people. So there's some ideas coming in. Enough light, clean space to move between desks, clean, bright. In a physical classroom, evidence of learner participation in the room's decoration, photos, art, etc. These are great ideas, came in. And there might be some more. Aromatherapy, plugs in, smell goods, window space, and art.
Yes. Oh, those are beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So important. Again, our first question, we're thinking about those physical safe places. And this time we're thinking about those physical safe places. Was there another one, Laura? I saw you.
Yeah, these are great. A sense of space, warm presence in people, windows and plants are a plus.
Yes.
Enough markers, enough markers. Lots of windows with personal items like coffee cup, family photos.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Keeping that coziness too. So these physical spaces are so important, and how we exist in them is so important. And we'll look today at some ideas for safety, and really increasing the feelings of safety in a space. And I also know that we're working with people who are in different environments, and some of you might be walking into spaces that aren't yours regularly, and you have to share them with others and they change. Others of you might have more control over a space that you use daily. So we'll keep all those things in mind as we continue to think about this concept. Now, I already saw from your registrations that a number of you are teaching online or doing both in person and online. So to give you a little background, as we're thinking about this safe and stress-free classroom, a few years ago, I got started working with a group of people who we were like a professional development continuing ed group together, and we talk about trauma-informed practices. And we started these conversations in May of 2020. So if you can think back to where we were in May of 2020, we had just started to realize that what we had thought might be a 2-week pandemic had turned into a multi-month pandemic and didn't have a clear end anymore. And all of us were doing things online. And so we said, this is great to have all this information out there about what's happening in the physical space, but what about a digital classroom space? And so this started a big conversation about what do we need to feel safe online as well in these Zoom classrooms and other types of spaces like it. So for me, one thing is, knowing what's expected in the space and having options about like whether I'm supposed to be on the camera, whether I'm not, can I bring food? Is it okay if my cat walks across my screen? What are all the pieces that might come with being on Zoom? So for the record, everyone is welcome in your picture. And as Laura mentioned earlier in the chat, you are welcome to keep your camera on or off, and always feel free to put things in the chat and unmute. But we would love to see if you had other ideas that have helped make your digital classroom spaces feel safe. Is there anything there in the chat, Lauren?
Well, one thing just came in, routines. Routines.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about screen breaks because I know that actually physically like staring at a screen for long periods of time without letting your eyes relax is something that I find activating. So just knowing like, oh, I can look away from the screen, I can look where I need to, I can like relax my gaze is really helpful for me. A couple more things have come through: seeing faces when teaching, clear leadership and rules, emotional check-in led by learners,
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Yeah.
established expectations, greeting everyone as class starts. I used to send a morning inspiration in our classroom and have each student pick a day doing the same.
Oh, I love that. Wow. These are really fun ideas. Thank you all so
There's
much.
more, Amy. There's so
Oh,
many more.
please,
Okay,
please.
affirmations, live video, and then oh, someone wrote rules, like expectations is maybe a better word. So yeah.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And that's, yeah, helpful to know what we're all getting into there. Oh, these are so helpful. Thank you all. Continue again, if you have more ideas, put those in the chat and we'll have more opportunities as we go on. So when we're talking about the safe and stress-free classroom, as we are in this series, I want to hold that as educators, we hold significant power to reduce stressors in our classroom and create a space where learners feel safe. And these things are going to go hand in hand. So that's what we're focusing on today. Now, when we think about stress and the things that come into our lives, there are different levels of stress. We're specifically thinking about things that are toxic stress, unnecessary stressors in our lives that create harm for us. So I'm sure that if you have walked by, a magazine rack, you've seen a clickbait article, you have read any number of books, you could simply say stress is bad for us, right? That information is clearly out there. But what that really means can take a different form when you look kind of behind the curtain and think about what it means in the brain, and specifically for learners when there's a lot of stress. So we're going to think about what happens to our brain when it's on stress. You can see the stressed brain here on the screen. So a brain with lots of lightning bolts coming out of it, thinking about all the information that it's receiving and the trouble around it. It feels a little out of control. So with that image, I want you to think about stress and cortisol. Cortisol is that stress hormone that comes into our system when we experience something that's out of our coping abilities. So specifically, if we're thinking about bigger items like trauma, trauma is any event or ongoing experience that's exceeding your coping abilities. You can't actually find a way to kind of continue to move through your life. It causes you to pull back in some ways. So stress we're thinking of as, items that certainly wear down, keep that cortisol flowing in our system. Trauma might be the bigger events that really cause us to go into a more constant fight or flight state. So with those things, we see that the nervous system changes. It actually interrupts the parasympathetic system in your body, and it activates your sympathetic nervous system. So that's where that fight or flight comes into play. It actually makes you unable to access other parts of your brain. So parts of your brain that help you to remember things, that help you to put things into long-term memory, parts of your brain that help you to emotionally relate to others. When you have consistent stress and high cortisol levels or experiences with trauma or anything that brings up that trauma, that can cause you to suddenly go into this space. So literally, when we are thinking about stress, you can't learn with stress really present in your life. So we're thinking about the classroom as a space to reduce some of the stressors that might be present in people's lives and make a space where they don't have to carry those as strongly there. So I want to give a little disclaimer that, when we talk about stress and trauma today, I like to call myself a trauma layperson. I'm not a particular specialist or professional. I'm just an educator who spent a lot of time learning and reading about trauma in the classroom and the effects that it has on students. So I'm excited to have these conversations alongside you and answer questions the best I can. Laura also has a good bit of training and expertise in the topic. So we're excited to share from that perspective today. So thinking again about stress and trauma, sometimes it's something you can see in a person. You can see the reaction, you can see they're very stressed or how they're carrying themselves. And sometimes it's not. So stress can come from so many different angles in our lives, and we don't always get to see all the facets of a learner's life. And it's the same with trauma. Trauma can happen at many different points in a person's life, or it can be an ongoing experience. And it's often not something that we can see with our eyes. So that's why I put the image of the sunglasses on here. It's the thought of that we're kind of obscured to what might be coming into our classroom. I find it can be even more challenging when you're teaching online and you can't really see what's in a person's environment, how they might be carrying themselves. Even the state of their belongings might be able to tell you a little bit about what they're experiencing in their lives. So when you don't get as much that kind of interaction, it can be more challenging. So with trauma, it's about an experience of the individual person and not the event. So I want you to think about if two people experience the same event in a day, they could have two different interpretations of what that event is, right? You and a friend go and see something and you notice different aspects, different details. It's the same with trauma in that two people could experience something and one has a trauma reaction to it and another may not, or different severities. So when you think about the learners coming into your classroom, it's never safe to assume anything about traumatic experiences they may be carrying or stresses that they may be carrying, because we can't see at all what their experience is on the inside. So in the same way, you won't always know what triggers are for people in your classroom. So when we're thinking about safety in the classroom today, one of the things we're thinking about is best overall practice. What are some things that are really helpful in kind of covering a wide variety of things that could be triggers for folks who've had traumatic experiences, and then thinking about how we can reduce those so that there's a little less potential for re-traumatization within our classroom. Now, I also want to point out that educators also carry stress and trauma into their own experiences too. So something to watch out for and be thinking about is, what are certain triggers for you? What are things that might send you into a different space? And how can you be aware of those and kind of have an action plan ready? And we'll talk a little later about a personal safety plan and how you might incorporate that. So a little awareness can go a long way in this. All right, so coming back to the stress and trauma, when someone is triggered by a traumatic experience, or when they're bearing a lot of stress coming into the classroom, they're often dysregulated. And thinking about the term dysregulation and regulation, I want to go back to a great definition that I heard at a conference last fall by the speaker is Josh McNeil, who's right in this Philadelphia area. And he described regulation as the ability to put time and thought between a feeling and a reaction. So we've got the image on the screen there, if that's a helpful way to think about it, with the clock in the brain between a feeling and a reaction. But if you have a feeling that comes up and you are dysregulated, you don't get the time and the space to think about what happens next. You just act. So if you have been in a classroom and you had a student who suddenly gets up and is angry and they throw something on the floor and storm out, that is dysregulation. That's an example of how that might manifest. When someone yells or gets upset, and we'll look at some other examples of this in the next slide, that's dysregulation. They're unable to put the time and the thinking between their feeling and their reaction. So what we're aiming for is a space where students can feel regulated, that they have that space in between. So what does it look like when someone is so stressed or triggered that they become dysregulated? I'm sure these are words that are familiar to you. These are the the fight instincts, the flight instincts. And sometimes we forget about some of the others, but some other words that have been included in this recently have been freeze and fawn. So fighting could be things like you're lashing out, you're pushing and shoving and throwing. It's more of an action you want to combat in that moment. Flights can look a lot of different ways. One of the ways that we often see it is this sense of kind of disengagement. So it could even be as simple as the learner who's just on their phone. They're kind of checked out, move away from the situation. It could be that they're zoned and they don't really pay attention fully to what's going on. So that level kind of moving away from what's happening. Freeze could also manifest in a number of ways. One way that I see it is you might disappear from class and just not be able to be reached, kind of cut off that communication. It also can manifest in the form of folks who are chronically confused, even by simple instructions. They're having a difficult time following along. And I point out some of these things, especially because often in the moment, it can be hard to think of them as, oh, this is a fight response, or this is a flight response to something else that's going on. Oftentimes it feels just disruptive to the classroom. But if we can reframe our thinking about how this might manifest, I hope that that'll give us a little bit more room to, again, increase the safety. Laura, it looks like you have something in the chat. What's going on?
Yeah, a participant shared, that's true. Some people mask their true trauma, like by smiling, always seeming upbeat, but holding some stress. And some people think it's normal to hold that pain or feeling in until it might be an outburst, which can cause behavior issues, not knowing how to deal with it. I think that's really true, yes. And it makes me think about regulation. Like our systems are built, our nervous system is built this way on purpose, right, to deal with survival threats. So if we're regulated and something actually is a threat to our survival, we're meant to be activated, right? But then our system is meant to go through this wave from regulated to deregulated. And chronic stress, toxic stress, too much pressure on a system, an event that is too much, overwhelming, right? Whatever that might be, again, as Amy said, not emphasis on the event, right? But the system, right? For that system can make us stuck at any point, right? Along that wave, right? So that point might be like, I'm trying to keep the stress down. I'm trying to keep the stress down. I'm trying to keep it down until I'm overwhelmed, right? So those kinds of responses are absolutely like a beautiful and example of the kind of toxic stressors that Amy's talking about, and why it might be difficult to like just see, right, all the time, like what are the stressors that our learners are carrying in. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that comment. And thanks for that expansion, Laura. So the last one that you see on the screen here is fawn, and sometimes this is not as frequently included in the list when we see things like fight or flight or freeze. But this is one that's come up more recently, and it's maybe a student who's hanging on your every word and compulsively complimenting. That was so great. That was such a good lesson. Oh my gosh, this is so good, right? They're constantly hanging there, and it's a way of creating almost a sense of attachment in that moment. So again, it's a coping skill. It's the way that the body is reacting to this dysregulated moment, but it's one way that you could see this manifesting. So our job is thinking about enhancing a window of tolerance in all of this. So I have an image here of the window in the middle, right, which has a peaceful looking day outside, some green grass, the blue skies, the plants are growing on the windowsill, and then what it might look like on either side of that window of tolerance per se. So on the one side, right, you have kind of this level of flight. This person is checked out. They have their head on their computer. They're not really connecting there. And on the other side is what we'll call the hyperarousal. So we could have hypoarousal on the blue side with the person with his head on the desk, and hyperarousal with this volcano coming with lava coming out of it. So the window of tolerance is the middle. And what happens over time, if you have that chronic stress, you have traumatic events, is that the window of tolerance can grow smaller for folks. And so what they're able to deal with and have regulation over is much smaller than maybe someone who doesn't have that chronic stress. And so it's much easier for one event to send them either into the hypoarousal or the hyperarousal. So I want you to think about it in these terms. So you can imagine this. If it's helpful to close your eyes, you're welcome to do that. So where you're living, maybe your housemates, or if you have kids, they're fighting loudly in the next room. And you are trying to make something for dinner and you have a time constraint and are trying to get out the door. And then you notice that there is a bill that is now overdue that's been hiding behind the bag of potatoes that you just grabbed. And you realize that you need to get that paid right away. Meanwhile, they're still fighting in the other room. And then another person, maybe a partner or a housemate, comes in and says, "Why didn't you get any more paper towels last week? We're all out." Now, very good chance that you might look at that partner or housemate and say, "It's not my job to get the paper towels all the time," right? And have that big manic response when really it wasn't about the paper towels, was it? Right? It's about all these other compiled stressors that have been in your system. You have the time constraint, you have the bills, you have people yelling. And so one thing can send you kind of beyond in that moment. So that's what I want you to think of when you see maybe outbursts or these other expressions from students, is that it's often not just that moment. It's often a bigger picture of what's going on. And that can help us to have more empathy in the moment. So another thing that you might think about on the opposite end of that is, let's take another scenario. Let's say that you just got off the phone with your landlord, who said on the phone that they are deciding to sell your building in the next 6 months. So you're going to have to move. You are waiting for the L, but it's running late and all of the cars are absolutely packed by the time they do arrive. And you just realized that you are so hungry because you didn't have time to go grocery shopping last week. So you didn't have anything to grab for breakfast on your way out. And then you remember a text from your brother that says, "We need to talk about my mom's health." And you just feel like you don't have the energy to respond to that text. So you get to your class and you sit down and you're a student in this class and realize there's a test today. Whew, okay, that might be a moment of many different reactions, but it certainly could be a moment of hypoarousal. Like you can't really participate in the test. You don't feel like you're really present there. You don't feel like you have the energy to respond to that text. So many ways that this could manifest. So this window of tolerance in the middle is the sweet spot. Right? That's where we hope that our learners can stay so that they can learn, so that they can be present to what's happening. Not that they are overstimulated or understimulated, but that they feel like they have the right amount of stimulation to be there and the regulation to handle that. The more that we have safe spaces and protective factors, the more that this window of tolerance can expand. So again, we'll be taking a closer look at what protective factors might mean in just a moment. All right, so we're moving out of our brain science, the type space for this as we think about these things, but I do want to make one last note that this is not just something that we can say, oh, like people will have to get over it. This is the way that our classrooms run, the way that our systems run. And I want you to think about a time when you felt stressed, and if there was something that someone said to you that was upsetting or unhelpful, or maybe just something trite that someone said that very quickly. Our culture has a lot of statements like, "You gotta just buck up and push through," or "You gotta get past this," or keep rallying the troops, or "You gotta calm down," which no one in the history of ever being told to calm down has done that. So think about those phrases and what someone said that was upsetting to you, what the cultural and common responses are, and how those make you feel in a time of stress. So again, we can't just push stress out of our lives. This is something that we have to acknowledge a feeling or experience. We have to approach it with compassion. And then within the context of our classrooms, we might need to implement a boundary as well. So it's okay to notice that these are real experiences of people. And we want them to have space to express feelings and to be honest about where they're coming from. but it's also true that we can't allow everything in a classroom space. So, for example, I had a student who came in at one of my previous positions, and we had some bus passes to offer for the month to students, but we had run out for that month and we didn't have the next month's ready yet. And so the student came in to ask for more bus passes and we didn't have them. And so he knocked over a cup of pencils right by the desk onto the floor, kind of spattered everywhere. That's a kind of behavior that creates an unsafe environment for other students, right? And for myself. And so it's not a behavior that we say, oh, oh man, the student is stressed and that's just how they're expressing it, and say that's okay. It's still okay to also put a boundary on those things. So a conversation in that kind of space may look like, I can see that the fact that we're out of bus passes is really upsetting today. I will have more bus passes at the beginning of next month, and that's in 2 weeks. But I can't let you knock over the pencils today. And so I do need you to either step out or to leave for today. And I'm going to give you a call this afternoon. So something that sets a clear boundary in that space as well is important. All right. Any other comments or questions that are in the chat there, Laura, that we should address before moving on?
Oh, just tomorrow will be better.
Yeah. Yep.
So, right. So, just as those kind of piling on of stressors is something that we don't always see, right? When we just see the behavior. We also maybe don't see the opportunity to like down stress or or re-regulate or co-regulate, right? So that's happening too. So maybe remembering to have dialogue around that with ourselves, right? As instructors in those moments can also be a helpful tool for us to just deal with those really hot moments.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. All right, so let's get into some of the real practical stuff today, because I want everybody to leave today with lots of different tools that you can take into your space, and some practical aspects. So we covered fact number one, which is that we know our brains can't learn well when we're feeling stressed or unsafe in a scenario. But the second part of that is that we do have a lot of really powerful tools available to us that can help make a classroom space feel really safe, so other people can learn. So this is where I want to get into the details a bit about what it means to be a protective factor. So a classroom is one way, and the educators that are part of that, to offer a protective factor in our learners' lives. So I have the image of the umbrella on the screen. I like to think of that as, your way of protecting yourself from the rain, but it's something you can kind of hold over your classroom, that helps give a space that whatever students might be bringing in from the outside, that they have an opportunity to feel more protected within the classroom space. So the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration gives this definition for protective factors. They say protective factors are characteristics associated with a lower likelihood of negative outcomes or that reduce a risk factor's impact. Protective factors may be seen as positive countering events. So again, if we're thinking about those scenarios that we thought about earlier, whether the one on the L or the one of making dinner, there were a lot of events that were, I guess we could call them risk factors in this, circumstance. And we're thinking about all these stressors that are coming in. The protective factors in our lives are countering events. So when we think about things like, many of you may have heard of the ACEs study that came out years ago, and an updated ACEs study after that. But ACEs are these adverse childhood experiences. And there's a list of all the different things that could be happening during childhood, which would influence what your ACEs score is. And higher ACEs scores are related to things like addiction and health outcomes and numerous other things for adulthood. So looking at those outcomes, when we compare them also with protective factors, we find a different outcome. So if a student or if a young child has a high number of these adverse childhood experiences, but they also had a really high number of protective factors in their life, their outcomes are not as severe as someone who didn't have as many protective factors around them. So this is also important into adulthood, and many of us here are instructors for adults. And so thinking about protective factors, we need them at all points in our lives. So the educator's role, right, is creating this space and having this one additional protective factor for the learners that come to us. So again, thinking back to our goal, creating a safe classroom space through practice and environment that avoids additional stress and re-traumatization and promotes ultimately that healing, that space for an increased window of tolerance, a safe space. So we're talking about safety today, but I want to give you a few other words to think about when we're thinking about what I'm going to call trauma-informed principles. So if you're familiar with the idea of trauma-informed principles or CARE, there's a lot that goes into it, and we're kind of doing a very short modified version of some of those ideas today. So safety is a huge part of trauma-informed principles in what we consider. But there are 5 other words that I want you to think about when you consider what you might contribute to a classroom to make it a safe space. So one of them is trustworthiness. You're providing good, accurate information about what's happening and what might happen next. Another is choice and control. So you feel like the individuals are treated with dignity and have their own control over how they're participating. Collaboration. So collaboration is about sharing power with the learners and helping learners build relationships with each other. Empowerment, which is building on learners' strengths. And cultural humility and responsiveness. So this is about recognizing the differences in how different social and cultural groups might experience something and how they might react to something or how they might even recover from a traumatic event. And this is about connecting learners to one another and to support and resources that meet their unique needs, whether that's a language need, a cultural need, etc. So all of these pieces work together. They're just additional words to get you thinking about what the big picture might look like here. So we're going to look at some strategies today for creating safety and removing some of that stress and experience from the classroom. And we're going to look at it in 3 sections. So first, we're going to think about the environment. And again, we'll have a chance to think about both physical environments and online. Then we're going to think about the people who are involved. And finally, we're going to think about planning and how you can plan ahead to have some of these elements incorporated into your lesson. So we're going to start with the physical environment. Now, I have some ideas here that I'm going to start listing on the screen, but this is a great opportunity for you all to share your experiences and wisdom. And so I would definitely encourage you during these next few slides as we're sharing ideas to contribute yours in the chat. And we'll be checking in with Laura to see what ideas come up. So again, we started talking about this at the beginning. So if you have already shared great ideas about what a safe physical environment means for you. But as we think about it from the lens of these trauma-informed principles, some ideas that you could implement today even are thinking about seating options. What do the seating options look like in your classroom? Are there enough seats for every person? Do people feel that they have the option to choose where they sit? Are the seating options conducive to a safe feeling environment? I know I mentioned, and I think a few other people mentioned, when it's tight in a room, that can be really stressful. And so there are options to kind of change that around so that it opens the space up a bit more. Being clear about classroom policies is the next piece. So being clear about what it means to, are you allowed to go out and answer a phone call or use the restroom? What's your policy about using phones during class? And just the clarity about that helps people kind of set up their own individual environment within the bigger classroom better. And it helps them feel more at ease about anything that might come up, right? Especially as we talked about in previous workshops, if you have a group from many different cultures, there might be many different expectations for what it means to exist in a classroom. So this helps bring clarity about what's expected. And then just 2 others that I want to share here, and we'll get some ideas from the chat if there are any there. thinking about knowing what resources are available in the classroom. And honestly, this can be as simple as we have some highlighters over here in the corner. There's a printer if you need to use it. So actually knowing about the physical resources there, being able to consult, am I allowed to take a book from this bookshelf? Do I need to bring something specific with me, or is that going to be provided? But having just an understanding of the environment is so important. And then lastly, having inclusivity symbols in the environment helps the students to know that they're welcome in that space. So whatever that may look like, different organizations may have different regulations about what that means for your space, but keeping in mind that different inclusivity symbols have a greater meaning for the community to show that all are welcome. Laura, is there anything to address in the chat so far?
Not so far, but I was thinking about inclusivity symbols, and I was also thinking about having materials that reflect like who our learners are, right? And
Wow,
so
yeah.
like, do I see myself reflected in the materials in this classroom, in the images, in the materials, like, because we know now that there is a connection between having a sense of belonging and a sense of survival. So not having a sense of belonging can trigger some of those same fight or flight responses, because belonging has been so fundamental to our survival as a species. So, oh, great. And someone wrote, yes, I was just going to say a similar thing. I like to invite learners to bring in things to decorate the space. Though I realize this isn't possible for everyone in all classes. Yeah, but even if that's not possible, is it possible to invite everyone to bring in something to put on a desk or a table or to share, right? Are there ways to invite that in even if you can't leave it in the space? Yeah, thank you.
Wow, I love that. Thank you so much. All right, so if you have additional ideas, again, feel free to include them there. Oh, I apologize. I have a couple more. I had forgotten that I added on here. So we'll take a look at these. Having a place to go where overwhelmed, whether that's inside your classroom or outside your classroom, it's also really important. And having something available, depending on your learners, you might have something like a fidget that's available to them. So it can take many different forms. You may remember from years ago, things like fidget spinners. That's one example, that things just kind of move that you can tinker with. Something like pipe cleaners from the dollar store, or I've seen Play-Doh set out on tables. But oftentimes that's a way for people to kind of work through some nervous energy that may be there and feel more at home. With adult learners, I think it's especially important to note that these are not just like toys that you're throwing out, right? That can sometimes feel demeaning to that population. So feeling like this is another tool that might help you to focus and to learn, and you're welcome to use it or not use it. But having some option like that is another option. All right, so now moving on to our online environment. So for all of you who have taught or are teaching online, we'd love to hear your ideas, again, of anything else that may come up to help make an online environment feel safe. So one thing is asking folks to rename or include their pronouns on there. That is a way that we can all know how to address one another. Online environments, as we've seen, can be really difficult to get to know other people that are around you. We don't get the same opportunities to have small talk or to comment on something quickly. You have to unmute and intentionally say who you're speaking to, and those types of things. And so simple things like having an accurate name or the name that you'd like to be called, and having the pronouns that you'd like to use included on there can make a big difference for people feeling welcome. Again, the options for having the camera on or the camera off. One of the more stressful meetings that I've ever been to is I had back-to-back meetings scheduled with a new job, and they were all on Zoom for this day. And I had one scheduled over lunch, so I didn't actually get a lunch break. And during the lunch hour, I was very hungry, and I was trying to get some food in, but I didn't feel comfortable eating on camera. And the person leading the meeting specifically called me out and said that I needed to have my camera on, even if I was eating lunch. Well, that immediately made me feel a little reticent about this group. And so I take that example as when we're thinking, we don't always know what's going on in a person's schedule, in their life, what their comfortability is. So giving them options to be on or off camera gives them the flexibility to feel safe there. So a third one here is opportunities to share their environment or part of it. This is a way, again, to get to know one another. So if folks feel comfortable, you could ask the learners in your class to show something that they have around them that they like, that they're proud of, that they would like to share with the class, or even give a small tour of space. So that way you get to know a little bit about where each person's coming from. Now, again, you'll want to modify that to the comfort levels of the people in your classroom. Not everybody wants to show off their space, so having multiple options of how to participate is helpful there. Our next one is, again, a protocol for leaving if overwhelmed. So just like in a physical space, we might need to say, if you're feeling overwhelmed or if something comes up, feel free to step into the hallway or wherever that might be. The same thing is true online. So saying to learners something to the effect of, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I'd really appreciate it if you could send me a chat to let me know, but feel free to step off, whether that means you need to log off of the call or stop your video. If you aren't able to reach me in the moment and something comes up with the chat, please contact me later and just let me know what was going on as you're able. So those kinds of messages make it okay for students to step out when they have that need. And then lastly, a statement of welcome for all can be an important piece online, especially again, as it's harder to express yourself online and get to know one another. You have to really be intentional about unmuting and being clear about what you're saying. So a statement of welcome is acknowledging that you have people from all different walks of life that are coming to join you, and naming some of those can be really helpful. So saying that people of all races, all socioeconomic statuses, all genders, all experiences are welcome in this space. That's a way to just acknowledge that you are attempting to create that space even online. All right, Laura, any other ideas in the chat right now?
Not yet. I was thinking here about naming, renaming, and pronouns. I was thinking about this issue because I continue to learn for my own students about it right now. So for instance, some people don't have the option to change a name online, even if they want to for safety reasons, right? Or I've heard people say, like, maybe it can be an invitation so that I don't feel called out if I don't want to share. So I just think that as we all do, continue to use the language we use for these invitations is another way that we can create safety online. And then I was really thinking about what you're sharing in the online environment, Amy, and thinking about the mechanisms of online. So for instance, if you have the technology to help people record names for one another as a way to ensure that we're learning what to pronounce each other's names, having everyone do that can be helpful. Or understanding the mechanisms on Zoom for like hand raising. There's obviously like skin colors that are slightly different and shades, and people have different ways of wanting to engage with that to represent. So I think just understanding and acknowledging those mechanisms can also be a helpful way of acknowledging the limits of the environment in which we're working. And then there's more ideas in the chat here. Does anyone have a good script to explain why they're being invited to share pronouns? This isn't a norm that all people are familiar with. It can be confusing sometimes and feels varying degrees of safe for different people. Agreed. Well, great ideas. A lot of these seem less useful for ELLs and those with low digital literacy. I've tried some and get blank looks because words like overwhelmed or just the idea of leaving temporarily aren't familiar to students. Amy, I'm going to let you take this because I know you have the background here. Yeah,
that's a really interesting piece there. So Sarah, I love that the script for explaining why they're being invited to share pronouns. Is that also with the ELL community?
Inclusive of them as well, but I feel that there's lots of American-born folks who aren't necessarily familiar with pronouns. I've been in professional development situations where people are like, share your pronouns, and some people are like, huh? Like, why? Like, so
Sure.
just even having something where it's, I find it personally a little awkward when people are asking for it, but then no one's framing like why it's being done.
That's a great point. Yeah. So I'm not sure I have an explicit script ready. Laura, did you have an idea with that? So you
I think this would change based on environment, Sarah. Right now, I share a I share a statement in my syllabus materials that we go over the first day that's like, gender identity can be cisgender or it can be transgender. This is the difference. Here is a link to some resources. Here are some reasons why people might want to choose different pronouns. Here are some examples. And then I just reiterate an inclusivity statement there about kind of self-determination, respect, right? But I think I would phrase that differently, or maybe not give access to a link, or make it, depending on the environment for the invitation. So I'd love to know if anyone else has a script that you all use. I think it's a great question for sure. Yeah, but I agree with you that having the context for that practice is really important. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So Gretchen, addressing that specifically with ELLs and the low digital literacy, that is really challenging. And you're right in that there might be some confusion there. I think, again, like what Laura said, it really depends on your environment. And I do wonder how much this might be included in some of that early classroom interaction where you're maybe setting expectations together or talking about that. In one of our previous workshops, we talked about the importance of, when we have people from all over different cultures and different experiences coming together, that they're all going to have a different vision of what it means to have an instructor, to be in a classroom, to be a student. And so this might be an opportunity to learn a little bit about where they're coming from with that, and even think about what concerns are there that exist in the room. And what is there an opportunity to educate and to bring some materials and say we are going to talk about pronouns because that is really important to the folks in our classroom? Or is it an opportunity to step back and say, okay, what are the unique needs here that we need to specifically address? But yes, you're absolutely right. That's I've seen those blank looks as well. Any other questions or thoughts coming up? Great. Thank you for these questions. Keep them coming. All right. So we're going to move on to think about the people. So I want to think about both you as the instructor, and I also want to think about the learners who are present. So as we're thinking about instructors, the first thing that I would encourage you to do is think about what I'm going to call a personal safety plan. This is really simple. It's 3 to 5 easy things that you could do to help yourself become regulated. So if you are the one in the classroom who feels you've been triggered by something, or you're coming in with a lot of stress, it's really important for you to have the tools to regulate, because when the instructor is dysregulated, it's much more likely that other folks in the classroom will also feel dysregulated. So I want to think about what are 3 to 5 things, again, that you could do. This could be taking a deep breath. This could be saying that everyone needs to take a 2-minute break and you're going to walk out into the hallway. This could be an opportunity to check in with, if you have another instructor across the hall and you need to step over and just like get face-to-face communication, and check in with them for 1 minute. But all quick things that you could do, a deep, again, that box breathing that we did earlier, that might help you regulate yourself. So that personal safety plan, I would even encourage you to write it down if you have somewhere that you keep your materials, or if you have a desk you regularly use, or if you have a name badge, you could even kind of tuck it on the back of your name badge, but somewhere where it's accessible, because oftentimes when we're dysregulated, again, we don't get that time to think, I'm feeling dysregulated. What should I do? It takes a bit to step back from that. So having something accessible that you could get to quickly and say, number 1, take a deep breath. Okay, right. That gives you a chance to not have to think about it. It's just there for you. So in addition to the personal safety plan, I want to bring up the importance of authenticity and honesty in a classroom. So for instructors, if we walk into a space and say, Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Everybody, get out your books. Come on, let's get out your books, right? This I'm so excited to be here isn't covering up anything else that you just said, right? The stress is going to come out in other ways. And so showing up with whatever is going on and being honest about that is actually really important for folks to feel safe in a classroom. Oftentimes when you're bringing something and you're saying, I am, I'm so excited to be here, but they can kind of see the stress underneath. It causes students to look at that and say, what are we doing wrong? Like, what am I contributing to this? And it becomes a sense of uncertainty in the classroom. So this is kind of your opportunity to say, if, I just came from a really stressful morning. If you notice something's off about me today, it's not you. This is just something that I'm bringing with me. I'm going to do my best to be present with you today. So those are a couple ideas on the instructor side. If you have additional ideas that come to mind, throw those in the chat. And we're going to look at the learners as the other side of our people here. So for learners, having a space to share concerns is so important. Just a few weeks ago, Laura talked about creating a culture of feedback, and this is part of it, right? When a learner feels like there is actually a space for them to bring their questions and concerns, then they have an opportunity to not just hold those back or to say, I'm not sure if I'm even supposed to talk to my instructor. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to interact in this space. So being clear about whether that's a time, whether that's a written format to do that, whatever you have that it's available to you, but making sure there is a space for concerns. Having learners get a chance to know other learners is also a great way to help them to feel that safety in a space. Again, if a learner doesn't recognize anyone else in their space and doesn't know who they are, it's that constant question of, you feel like you're among strangers. Who are these other people that I'm working with? And so giving them a chance to talk to one another is a sense of community building, which promotes safety. And finally, as Laura actually mentioned just a minute ago, sharing name pronunciation. So if you're giving an opportunity to talk, or maybe in initial introductions or in breakout rooms or individually, having people offer how their name is pronounced can be really helpful so that everyone has an opportunity to correctly address them. All right, any other ideas that we need to bring up now from the chat, Laura? Are we okay?
Not right now, Amy. Maybe they'll come back from the breakout activity.
Absolutely, yes. So we just have one more. I know there's so much information here, but I certainly want you all to have some time in breakout groups to talk about this. So we'll move through these quickly and then have an opportunity to talk to one another. So the plan is the last piece here. So we talked about the environment, we talked about the people, and now we're thinking about how you're planning and what effect that might have on safety. So in your plan, a shared agenda is super important. People should know what's going to be happening that day so they can anticipate. Again, you're giving information as best you can. The next one is being clear about breaks, and breaks for longer classes, they can and they should be planned. But you also might find you need breaks spontaneously for you or for your students. And those also just can take a lot of forms, and you can be clear about those when they come up as well. Say we're going to move on to whatever is next, but before we do that, I can see that we all need a break, or I need to take 2 minutes. And so we'll come back after that. You could call it many different things. You could say, we're all going to take a bio break, whatever you need to do. Do you need to get water, run to the restroom, whatever it may be? You could do a breathing exercise as your break. You could have a movement form break, like stretching, or just different kind of shaking it out movements that are more guided, that have the opportunity for people to participate. But many different ways to do a break, but they are important, and it's important to be clear when they're happening. Starting at the beginning with an accessible activity. So remember today how we all started by talking about a safe place for us. Really had nothing to do with knowing any content about the lesson. Really had nothing to do with, again, the brain science or anything else. It was just a personal experience to share. That's a great way to get learners into the classroom, to learn more about each other, to get their voice into the space. and to start with something that doesn't, again, feel like a threat. It's like an invitation. Having clear expectations and learning goals in your plan. So if a learner is working through something and they don't know what they're supposed to be getting out of it, it can be really frustrating and overwhelming. And again, if you're walking in with a lot of other stressors and overwhelm in your life, or you're feeling triggered by not knowing what you're supposed to be doing, that can set off a number of other responses. So those clear expectations can lead to success. Having those grounding moments or check-ins, like what Laura led for us earlier, to have everybody start on the similar foot. De-stressing activities during transitions can be important as well. So similar to the grounding moment, you could take a moment between your activities and do the box breathing as a class. And then honoring the start and end times of your class is another really important piece. So knowing, being clear about what those are for your students, and then knowing that you can fit within those realms. So I want to give a little plug here, and I think we do have another idea in the chat, so I want to check that, Laura. But I want to give a little plug to, if any of you are teaching online, and even if you're not, this could be a resource for you. I co-wrote this with a group back in 2020 about thinking about what these different principles that we talked about earlier might look like in online learning spaces. And we have many more ideas there than I could fit into our presentation today. So I want to give you that resource as well. So you'll see the link to that in the chat. And Laura, what else do we have going on?
Great. When you show the level of empathy regarding authenticity and honesty, I notice my students appreciate it. It helps build rapport and trust with the teacher and student. They seem to open up over time.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. So one quick note just before we go to our breakout rooms is that I hear regularly from folks, what do I do when I feel like my environment or my organization isn't actually on board with these kinds of practices and this kind of teaching? I've heard this from groups that are teaching on Zoom and everybody's in their own home environment and they feel like that's out of control. I've heard this from unsupportive administrations, from groups that are doing education programs in prisons. There's a lot of different factors that could lead to this. But what I want to point us to is the model of the circle of concern by Stephen Covey. And Stephen Covey says that in the middle, we have a circle of control. So it's the dark red circle in the middle. Those are things that we can directly control. And some of those are the things in your classroom. What do you have direct control over that you can implement? Outside of that, there's a circle of influence. So what is it that you can do something about? You can influence someone else to take action on. You can talk to someone about, maybe you don't have direct control over it, but you can have some sort of say in it. And then outside of that is a circle of concern. Those are all the things that are concerning you, that you're thinking about in a day, but you don't really have the control or influence over them. It's further out. What we have to focus on is our circle of control and our circle of influence. There will be many things that are within our concern, but this is an opportunity for us to think about where our power lies and how we can use that well to impact our students. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you a few breakout questions here to think about. I would love for you all in your breakout rooms specifically to think about number one, which says, what are some considerations that came to mind as we considered environment, people, and plan? So we shared some things in the chat, but what else would you add to that or change? And what experiences do you have around that? So I'd love if you could come back from your groups and if there are a few ideas to share specifically from that question, that'd be helpful. There are 3 other questions here. So if you have other things to talk about or want to explore other ideas in your groups, you can do that as well. I'm going to put a link in the chat for the Google Doc that has all these questions. So you have a chance to look at those as well. Laura, I apologize. We didn't talk earlier about this. Were you able to set up breakout rooms?
Go ahead and do that now, Amy.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we'll get a few breakout rooms together now and have a chance to talk for about 10 minutes and come back together at 2:20.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Awesome. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and conversations there. I want to just, before we get started, make sure you know next Monday we'll have a follow-up to this, a part 2 called Building Safety and De-stressing into the Plan. So we'll be looking at some more specific examples next week, and I'll give you some more instructions in just a minute. But I actually would love to hear first from the groups about anything that you found that you would like to share to either add to that first question there, adding to our list, or other pertinent ideas. So would any group members like to share something from today?
Howard, you should share your benefits.
You sure? Yeah, you too.
I'll tell.
What you got, Howard?
Oh, is my voice on?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me though. I'll just
Mhm.
be on the screen. Okay. Howard shared that he likes to bring food to his class, like maybe have some bananas, which are easy because nobody needs to wash them first,
And easy to spell.
and easy to spell for English language learners. So people can have something to kind of share that brings the group together in the beginning. I like that idea.
Love that. Thank you. Any other ideas that came up in the groups?
Our group, we basically did the same thing, teaching GED classes and ESL classes in various capacities. I think I'm the one who had the youngest group. My group are ages 16 to 24. But my experience with teaching GED has, the age range has expanded. But I'm looking at building safety and distress into the plan. We say there will be no plan without knowing the people in the environment. And we also said that we need to, safety depends on the learners. We have to consider their culture and creating a respectful environment and letting the learners create a space of their own, so that learners will be able to receive what the teachers are teaching. So those are some things we had came up with.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts? Oh, thanks for joining us, Christina.
I'm on the same staff with Katina, and I will have to leave. too.
Oh, we're glad
I
you were
just
here.
seen
Thank
that,
you.
yeah. So we do have another meeting we have. So I thank all of y'all, and I will see everyone next Monday.
Awesome. Thank you.
If I can just jump in before everybody, before anybody has to go to another meeting, we do have a survey, and would like to get everyone's feedback on the session. So I'm going to put that in the chat, and if you could take a minute to fill out the survey, that would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. And while we're on that route of giving you all a little bit of homework, I also have some, if you're planning to come to next week, we have some optional homework, but I'd love for folks to bring what's on your mind as we're thinking about this topic. So we'll have an opportunity to really dig into things and troubleshoot some ideas, and there will be some standardized ideas to look at. But if there are personal things you'd like to bring, we'd love to look at them together. So here are a few examples of things you might bring next week. It could be a portion of a lesson plan you're looking at where you're saying, I think we need like breaks in here, or I would like to add some regulation, but I don't know where it fits with all of this. So if you have something like that, you could bring a difficult dynamic between students that's causing stress in your classroom. If you have a situation like that, and maybe write out a few details of that to bring to the groups, that would be helpful. A draft of one of those personal safety plans. So if you have a few things in mind that you'd like to put on a personal safety plan, 3 to 5 things that can help regulate you, that could be a fun thing to share as well. And then lastly, if you have a classroom layout that you'd like to rethink and you think it might benefit from some other changes, you might even just bring a sketch of that or some ideas about that to share with a group as well. So we're going to have a lot of opportunity to share and kind of break down some of these things and look at some other scenarios as well next week. But it'll be very hands-on. I hope you'll join us. It'll be great to see you all again. So with that, I'll leave the next session up on the screen. And if you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
See you next week, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great week.